Up, we've got Emma. Emma's going to be busting some myths and giving you the truths of GMO. Welcome, Emma. Good morning, everybody. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to mourn the passing of our natural and healthy food. Okay, I'm sorry, that's bad taste. I'll try again. Why did Monsanto cross the road? To get to the organic farmers. Okay, I'm going to stop. So, jokes are not my forte, and I'm also not very good at lying. But I know a company that are very, very effective liars. I know a company whose entire 100-year-long, multi-billion-dollar industry of death, destruction, and disinformation is based entirely on lies and on deceit. And that's why we're here today, so that you, as everyday people, can gain some insight into some of the real facts that exist around GMOs, so that you can make balanced decisions on your food needs and on your health needs. The kind of information that Monsanto will never give you, ever. When you look into Monsanto, you find that they proudly proclaim that by the year 2050, 9 billion people on the planet will need food. And that introduces our first myth of Monsanto, that the world will need feeding. That's not such a myth, but they are the ones to do it through their genetically modified products, through their foods and related herbicides. Now, it's true, we will have a lot of people, and those people are going to need feeding. So, well done Monsanto for making a point. But are they the ones to actually do it? Well, let's look into current situations and into history. From what we have seen, experience has shown us that GMOs have no way of actually feeding the world and no way of increasing food security. If you consider South Africa as one example, we have over 16 years of experience of cultivating GMO maize, cotton, soy, and food security has not gotten better. Reportedly, food security is declining. That means there is less food available to the population whilst we have GMOs as a staple diet in South Africa. So at the same time, we can talk about how our food security needs are not being fulfilled, they're not being met by Monsanto now. But what about yields? Part of their myth is that they can increase yields. That means we can have more food available, which also sounds good. But then you look into the evidence for that too. A massive United Nations study, an international study on the assessment of agricultural skills, technology and development involved 400 scientists around the world and was endorsed by 58 countries. And their key findings, GMOs cannot meet food security needs because yields often are variable, that means they change, and often GMO yields actually decline in comparison to conventional methods. So we have lots of science out there that suggests we don't need Monsanto at all, and the idea that we need them to feed the world is just another myth that supports them and their ideas and not food security around the world. Now, when you consider how genetically modified agriculture actually works, there are other issues. It's an incredibly highly intensive way of doing farming. It involves massive amounts of fossil fuels, massive amounts of water, massive amounts of mined minerals, all of which are massively ecologically expensive, and they're also financially expensive. So if they say they can feed the world in the future as well as now, then look at the costs of these, the environmental costs and the financial costs of ever-increasing amounts of fossil fuel in a time of scarcity. As we lose these resources, as bad as they are, things will get more expensive, farming will get more expensive. But the real cost is not really financial, that's personal. It's the cost to the environment for everybody. And that leads us on to the second myth of Monsanto. Their second malevolent myth is that genetically modified organisms and their related herbicides are good for the environment. This is the claim. Well, I happen to know lots of research that suggests that it's quite the opposite. They are terrible for the environment. If you consider their the number one selling herbicide in the world, Roundup, which is used with their Roundup Ready crops, so that farmers, when they're growing their crops, use this herbicide. Monsanto have been found guilty and sued numerous times, including in South Africa just last year, for claiming that Roundup is actually biodegradable and good for the environment. So they've actually been sued for that lie. And if you consider the environmental effects of things like the herbicide, the poison, Roundup, then you just need to look at what kind of an effect you have. Well, you have loss of biodiversity. It's a broad spectrum herbicide. It's designed to kill all plant matter that it comes in contact with. That means that farmers can spray on their crops and kill the weeds, but they don't just kill the so-called weeds, they kill all the other plants around as well. Now, everybody knows that we live in a circle of life that involves a food web and chains, and those chains are broken when you start killing off all of the plants that other insects and other species depend on. Aside from that, we have contamination of water supplies. We have death of microbes in the soil. So we have the destruction of all of nature, as far as we know, in the areas where these herbicides are actually used. But loss of diversity in terms of biodiversity is only one of the problems. Then you have the loss of seed diversity. When you have one company owning 90% of the world's seed, you start to severely reduce the amount of diversity available. And this is very dangerous for the whole of humankind in numerous ways. But in terms of farmers, what happens is they have to grow Monsanto's genetically modified crops in areas where they have been used extensively. The reason being is contamination. What happens is if you grow genetically modified millies and release those into the environment, then all of the organic and natural conventional ways of growing those crops are contaminated by the genetic structure. There are two problems with that. There's an ecological problem, and then there's a seed sovereignty problem. Sovereignty. That means the independence of farmers to be able to choose which seeds they grow. Their seeds and their crops get contaminated, and then they may actually be charged or sued in regard to infringement of intellectual property rights. GMOs are patented. The technology is patented by the biotechnology companies. And therefore, if their technology lands up through no fault of your own in another farmer's fields, they can come along and they can sue you and they can enforce their seed upon you thereafter as well. So there's lots of problems. Problems with the environmental effects, problems with the loss of seed diversity, and also problems in relation to the sovereignty of the farmers. Now, these are all very important issues, but I want to talk to you about one last myth of Monsanto. There are many to choose from, but this is the last I'd like to talk to you about. And that's the idea that the seeds and the technology and the use of the herbicides is safe. Now, when you consider Roundup and its massive expanse all over the world, you might think to yourself, okay, this must be a very well-tested product, right? It must actually be highly regulated. Well, when you look into it, you find an abundance of research that suggests that Roundup is actually incredibly dangerous to human health, alongside with GMO technology. But Monsanto's Roundup has been directly implicated in sterility, in birth defects, in hormone disruption, in tumors, and in cancer. And most of you may be aware, if you're not already, that the World Health Organization's International Research Association for Research into Cancer, the IARC, they have recategorized glyphosate, which is the main ingredient of Roundup, as a probable carcinogen. That, in other words, they're saying it probably causes cancer. So when you consider this implication, you might say, well, surely it's regulated. Surely there's some way of testing. Well, there is some regulation, certainly. But when you consider the science and look at the studies, what is the regulation based on? Well, there are three main bodies responsible for the regulation of GMOs that come from America. In the United States, the Food and Drug Administration, the United States Department of Agriculture, and the Environmental Protection Agency. All of these agencies are designed to protect us from the seeds that come from America, from Monsanto and other biotech companies, and land up around the world. Now, what do they require? They don't carry out any longitudinal studies of their own. These organizations have not carried out one single longitudinal study into the health impacts of GMOs or herbicides. Not one, nor into the long-term environmental impacts. Why, they say? Well, the reason is twofold. The first one is that they say that genetically modified seeds and technology and herbicides and the use of them is substantially equivalent to other conventional methods. So basically what they're saying is it's not really any different, so we don't really need to do any tests or studies. Due to this fact, the regulation of GMOs is based on, for the most part, voluntary self-regulation. That means the very companies that produce this technology, produce these products, are the ones responsible for releasing the science that tells us that they are safe. Massive conflict of interest. Now, when we consider the regulation, it's a very important issue. So first of all, you don't really have any need for studies. It's voluntary. They say it's substantially equivalent. At the same time, the Monsanto and other biotech companies will not release their seed for testing by independent scientists. When they do carry out their studies, they're often not published, they're often not peer-reviewed, and the raw data, the real nitty-gritty of the figures is not released to the public. So nobody has any say. This is what we call tobacco science. Imagine you had cigarette companies, the tobacco industry, charged with carrying out health impact studies of cigarettes. Imagine that. You would laugh. You'd say, don't be silly. Of course not. There's a massive conflict of interest. These people want to sell their product. It's the same thing with GMOs. They are responsible for their own studies and their own health trials. Now, one of the reasons is substantial equivalence, but the last thing I want to talk to you about right now is the revolving door. And this is very important because it all comes down to regulation and safety. The very people that are charged with regulating food and making it safe for us, making the products that are released to us, our children, into the world, into our environment, those very same people at the top of these organizations are able to move from a regulatory organization into high up positions within companies like Monsanto. A legalized form of corruption. I'll give you one example to finish. Michael Taylor is the current Deputy Commissioner for Food in the Food and Drug Administration of America, one of the organizations responsible for regulating this industry. His previous jobs involved, first of all, working for a law firm whose client was Monsanto. So Michael Taylor worked in a law firm that directly paid his wages, and he worked for Monsanto. Then he moved to the United States Department of Agriculture, another regulatory body. He was involved there with food and health inspections. Then he moved back to Monsanto again, this time Vice President of Policy, Public Policy. And then he moved back to the FDA. So now he's a guy at the top making decisions about how our food and our welfare and our health, having worked for Monsanto for most of his career. This is the kind of revolving door that we have behind the science. Monsanto's history is terrible. It's bad. The same people that told us DDT was safe, now banned. The same people that produced and told us that PCBs were safe, now banned. The same people that released Agent Orange in the Vietnam War, which was banned in the 1970s, but somehow isn't banned now despite massive protest. These same people are charged with the almost entire food supply of our world in the future, with 90% of the current seed. Their history is bad. What they propose for the future is bad. And generally the whole company is bad news. But there is good news, because we can change it. You and I. We don't have to rely on government. By knowing about this, by reacting to it, by protesting, by signing petitions, by asking your supermarkets to label, by being aware, you can make choices that inform your food and your health decisions and decisions for our environment. And today, right now, being here, you're taking the first steps towards that change. Thank you.